Hey, what is going on, guys? This is the SS Ultimate Goku back with another video. And so, we have an interesting story to cover here that I gotta talk about. That is pretty trending, and it is getting out there for a lot of people that are talking about it on social media. So, there is a movement right now by the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase, where he has a hashtag saying "Make it official." Now, what is this hashtag for? Well, I'll tell you. So the hashtag "Make it official" is that Ted DiBiase is proclaiming that he is an unofficial WWE World Champion. And he wants it to become official. He wants it to be recognized as an official WWE Heavyweight title run. So, for anybody that doesn't know the backstory about this whole deal right now, or if you have no idea what this is, I'll explain it. So, back in 1988, Saturday Night's Main Event, which was a big deal back then, because there weren't that many pay-per-views. There were only like a couple that WWE had, as a matter of fact, back then. And Saturday Night's Main Event was like a network television thing on NBC, which was huge, because back then there was no Monday Night Raw, there was no SmackDown, obviously. SmackDown didn't come until 1999. Raw came in 93. So there was no cable television for pro wrestling, at least for the WWE back then. I mean, there were stuff on television, but it wasn't like a weekly type show deal like that, like you see every week with Monday Night Raw and whatnot. So basically, Saturday Night's Main Event, house shows, and even pay-per-views, the few pay-per-views they had, were big deals back then. They were big deals. So, Saturday Night Main Event happens. Ted DiBiase pays for Andre the Giant's service, basically, from Bobby the Brain Heenan. And so, Andre the Giant challenges Hulk Hogan to a rematch at Saturday Night's Main Event. This was following their, historical WrestleMania 3 encounter in 1987 at WrestleMania 3 in Pontiac Silverdome. Andre the Giant comes back. Ted DiBiase pays for his service and from Bobby Heenan. And so now Andre challenges Hogan to a rematch on Saturday Night's Main Event, February 5th, 1988. So this is what happens. So basically, the gist of this is Andre the Giant wins the match by cheating. Basically, or not really necessarily him cheating, but Ted DiBiase cheating for him, is basically, yeah, basically what happens is basically Ted DiBiase hires twin referee, or he doesn't hire twin, he hires a referee, okay, to basically pose as Dave Hebner. This was actually Earl Hebner that he got, who legitimately was Dave Hebner's twin brother. Okay, like they were legitimately real life twin brothers. Like, that's not a storyline, that's not a gimmick. They were really legitimately twin brothers that were both referees in the same profession. Earl Hebner worked for the NWA at the time. Dave Hebner worked for WWE. So what they did is Vince McMahon basically paid Earl Hebner a hefty penny to leave the NWA and become a referee for the WWE so he could do the storyline. Okay, and he ends up working for WWE until like 2005 or whatever it was. And Earl Hebner became one of the, better referees for WWE for several years. But that's not the point. So Earl Hebner is paid by Ted DiBiase basically to uh, pose as Dave Hebner and basically screw Hulk Hogan out of the title, which is what happens. Hogan kicks out of the move Andre does on Hogan at 1, literally 1, but Earl Hebner still counts 2-3, and the match is over, and Andre the Giant wins the title. Now, Hulk Hogan, as well as Ted and all the announcers, basically originally proclaimed that Earl Hebner got plastic surgery, that he was paid by Ted DiBiase for plastic surgery, and that's why they looked like each other. Which, no, I'm not kidding, they actually did this. The storyline was instantly retconned, or, I mean, like, the whole plastic surgery thing was instantly dropped. And now it was retconned, and they just called them twins later on, but they originally actually wanted to go with this idea that it was plastic surgery, rather than just say that the other twin was, an evil twin, that got paid by DiBiase. No, they had to go with a plastic surgery angle. So yeah, not always the best things when it comes to WWE. But anyways, so point being is, Ted DiBiase after the match, Andre the Giant gets the title, and immediately talks on the microphone and basically awards the title, or surrenders the title, and then awards it to Ted DiBiase. So now Ted DiBiase is the world champion. Like, he gave the title to Andre, or Andre gave the title to Ted DiBiase on Saturday night's main event. About 8 days later, exactly 8 days later, on February 13th, 1988, president at the time, Jack Tunney, who legitimately actually was sort of in charge. He really wasn't. Vince McMahon has always been in charge since he took over from his father. But back in these days, Vince McMahon tried to pretend that he wasn't the boss and that he was just a colored commentator. And so Jack Tunney was the on-screen president at the time for the WWE. Which behind the scenes, Jack Tunney actually did have an authority figure with Vince, because he was the guy who handled the Canada operation. Basically, Jack Tunney is Canadian, so he basically represented the Canada operations for the WWE back then, and that is why he was there to begin with, to be the kayfabe president. He basically handled all the wrestlers for WWE getting booked in Canada, basically, when they had Canada venues, because they were a private company back then. Now they're a public company, so they don't need that, but back then they did, to work in Canada. So that's why. So Jack Tunney on screen in WWE basically stripped, or he didn't strip Ted. He just basically said that his title reign was not acknowledged because he didn't actually win the title. Because of this, a tournament was set up, which led to WrestleMania 4, where the finals was between the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase and, ooh yeah, the best wrestler of all time, Randy Macho Man Savage. Ooh yeah. And my boy Randy Macho Man Savage wins, and wins the WWE Championship. So that's pretty much the end of the story, on the backstory. But 30 plus years later, Ted DiBiase is proclaiming that during that 8 days as the champion, he's claiming that during those 8 days before Jack Tunney made his decision to vacate the title, Ted DiBiase is claiming that he was the WWE champion for that week. because he actually defended this title once against Bam Bam Bigelow in a house show where he successfully defended the WWE Championship against Bam Bam Bigelow. Another guy who, by the way, should have been a world champion, who I didn't make my top 10 list that I made of top 10 wrestlers who never won a world title. But he is another guy who definitely should have won the world champion. But that's not the point here. Is Ted DiBiase successfully defended the title against Bam Bam Bigelow, and was even advertised as WWE champion during a house show, aka live events. It was a house show, and live events are house shows, but WWE, being publicly traded, wants to call them live events. But back in these days, house shows weren't actually a big deal because, again, there weren't that many pay-per-views and there weren't that many national televised, weekly televised shows like Monday Night Raw, as they didn't exist yet. So house shows were a big deal back then. They were more official than they are today. The last time I think there was a house show title change, I think it was like when Trevor Murdoch and Lance Cage lost the titles to Paul London and Billy Kidman, and then won them back 2 days later at another house show. I think that was the last time. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but point being, it rarely happens. Because, you want to either see it on Raw or on the pay-per-view or SmackDown. You don't want to see it on a house show when it's not televised. But back then, it was in 1988, it was a big deal, and it was more official than it was. And again, it was advertised by WWE that Ted DiBiase was advertised as defending the WWE Championship that night against Bam Bam Bigelow during that 8 days that he was supposedly not champion, by Jack Tunney's decision a week later. But Jack Tunney, according to his decision, was that the title was vacated the moment Andre surrendered the title. That was Jack Tunney's ruling. Now, ever since this happened, obviously there has been multiple times where guys have been awarded the title. Triple H was awarded the title in 2002. Technically, he did win a number one contender match against The Undertaker a week earlier for Brock Lesnar's world title. But because Brock Lesnar left for SmackDown, they were always without a champion, and that's why, he was awarded the title. Point being is since this whole decision, there's been many champions that were vacated, but their title was still recognized. Even Hogan, who won the title back from The Undertaker a week later after he lost the title in '91, he cheated to beat Undertaker. And Jack Tunney then stripped him of that title reign, but that title reign still counted. That still counted as an official Hulk Hogan title run. And so that's what Ted DiBiase is arguing. He defended his title successfully during the 8 days that it was supposedly vacated, and was advertised as world champion. So Ted DiBiase believes he should be a world champion, which would change the perspective of my video if he's actually acknowledged as a world champion, because that would break my rules. So this is quite an interesting thing. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone wants this to happen. And I'm kind of on the fence about it. Because here's why I don't think it should change. Because here's the thing. If they acknowledge this and they change the record books, and have this be recognized, because if they recognize this, then his title reign officially has to end on February 13th, because that's when Jack Tunney made his ruling that he was stripped of the title, because then that's when they had the tournament for WrestleMania 4 for the vacated world title, where Randy Savage ultimately beat Ted DiBiase in the finals to win it. So it would have to be from the 5th to the 13th if they're acknowledging this. But here's why I think this would be a bad precedent. Obviously with WWE, it doesn't matter because obviously everything is predetermined. But if they acknowledge this title reign, then it would set a terrible precedent where then other title runs in the WWE would be forced to be recognized. For example, Antonio Inoki. Antonio Inoki, 8 years earlier, I believe it was, if I'm not mistaken on my math here, 8 or 9 years before, Ted DiBiase supposedly won the world title. Antonio Inoki beat Bob Backlund to win the World Wrestling Federation champion from Bob Backlund in Japan. And that title reign is not recognized by WWE. It was like Bob Backlund never lost the title. They never acknowledged it, and still don't acknowledge it to this day. So, he was officially pinned. Everyone sees it on YouTube. It's on YouTube. You can literally look up right now Antonio Inoki versus Bob Backlund in All Pro Japan Wrestling, I believe it was called, for the WWE Championship. And Bob Backlund loses. It was in controversial fashion. It was a good match, by the way, too. But it was in controversial fashion with the finish. But still, nonetheless, Bob Backlund lost that match. So does that mean Bob Backlund's title reign needs to be split then too, since he didn't actually have the title for 6 years technically, since he lost the title to Antonio Inoki? What about Greg the Hammer Valentine? He technically has a legitimate claim because he also was a guy who had an unofficial reign against Bob Backlund because the match ended in a draw, or technically the referee actually thought that the Hammer actually pinned Bob Backlund, but in reality Backlund actually pinned him, and so there was a controversial whole decision with the referee there, and it led to the Athletic Commission, which were in charge back then, to say that no, this is a draw, and that the title will be vacated, even though WWE doesn't recognize that it was vacated, and Backlund ultimately won the title officially back in a rematch against the Hammer, and WWE does not recognize that the title was vacated. So technically Bob Backlund should actually be a 3-time champion, and his reign should be much lesser than a 1 title run where he had it for 6 years. So this is why I think this probably would be a bad precedent if Ted DiBiase is awarded to being officially acknowledged as a 8-day title reign champion for the WWE Championship title. But Ted DiBiase's going all out on this. Like, he's literally got t-shirts about it on his website, which he has WWF unofficial champion, 1-time WWF unofficial champion, which I don't know if Ted DiBiase knows this, but WWE can't use the letters WWF anymore. They lost a lawsuit to the Animal Company or whatever. So I find it very fascinating that he's using WWF champion on his t-shirts on his website. But nonetheless, like, they're going full out on this. Like I said, WWE can do whatever they want because, WWE changes the rules as they go along. I think awareness is being more spread because Ted DiBiase is on television now more. Like, he's not, I shouldn't say on the main roster television, but he's been on NXT. He's doing a storyline with some of the NXT wrestlers, as a manager or whatever, that's coming out and doing promos, funny promos. I've seen some of them on YouTube, with this new wrestler or whatever, and he's embarrassing him as a rich guy or whatever, outbidding him and stuff. He outbidded him on a house or whatever, a mansion, which I thought was kind of funny. And that's why I think this is being like kind of spreaded on a push for this. But again, like I said, I think this might be a bad precedent. WWE changes the rules as they go along. Like years ago, like Bob Backlund, like while he was WWE champion, he actually won a tag team championship actually with Antonio Inoki, which or actually no, it wasn't Antonio Inoki. I'm sorry, it was with Pedro Morales. I'm sorry, it was with Pedro Morales. He won the tag team title with Pedro Morales. And then right after he won it, the next day he was immediately stripped of the tag team titles with Pedro Morales because World Wrestling Federation rules at the time stated you could not hold two titles. So back in the day, you couldn't hold the Intercontinental title and the WWE title at the same time. You could only hold one. And that was the same thing with tag team titles. You couldn't hold the tag team titles and the WWE Championship at the same time. So point being is WWE changes the rules as they go along because that rule doesn't exist anymore. You can hold the WWE Championship and the Intercontinental Championship at the same time now. So WWE has changed the rules like as they've gone along. So that's my point here is when Ted DiBiase says, well, you know, Andre the Giant awarded me the championship, so I should be champion because look at all these other people after me, you know, that were awarded the championship or never actually beat their competitor to win the title. Again, you could also argue that the rules back in 1988 did not apply to you winning the title that way, where you're just awarded the title. Obviously, now WWE doesn't care about rules anymore because they've literally broken every precedented rule out there. Rematch clause are no longer a thing, and then they become a thing when they feel like it needs to be a thing. You know, WWE doesn't really care about canonized consistency anymore. But my point being is the rules that existed at the time when Ted DiBiase supposedly won the title, they were more consistent with the way you won a world title. And Jack Tunney's rule, which on screen, on TV, he was the president, even though Vince McMahon was the actual boss in reality. Jack Tunney was the president. He was in charge. And that was his ruling. And those were the rules back then. You know, I know WWE is predetermined, and again, they make up the rules as they go along, but if you wanted to actually be consistent, then you have to keep it that way. Because those were the rules that existed back then. And again, WWE being the not really giving a damn about canon anymore anyways, WWE, I could totally see them just deciding, oh, screw it, we'll just make him world champion officially now. But again, you know, I think that would screw everything up because you would have to reprint stuff. You would have to, you know, market it differently. You would have to say that, oh, yeah, there's one more champion than there actually was now all this time. There's so many different things they would have to change if Ted DiBiase was officially acknowledged as WWF or WWE World Champion. Now, after 30 plus years of not being considered a world champion. And it would be only an 8-day title run before he was stripped by Jack Tunney because that ruling still has to be considered canon. Even if you acknowledge his 1-week title run, Jack Tunney's decision to strip him of the title still counts because they had a vacated tournament that culminated at WrestleMania 4 where Randy Savage won the title. So regardless, that decision still would be final. Even if you reverse partially Jack Tunney's decision where he says that this title reign is not recognized, and you give him his 8-day title run while he was champion until Jack Tunney makes his ruling, that he is not champion and that the title is vacated, that ruling still has to stay in place of him being vacated of the title on the 13th, on February 13th, 1988. That ruling still has to stay in place, even if you reverse the decision of Jack Tunney saying that he was not a world champion during this 8-day stretch. So it would cause a lot of problems. Again, it's wrestling, it's predetermined. But I think it would be a terrible precedent if you do this, because then you could argue for the other guys who technically were a world champion for WWE, or were WWE World Heavyweight Champion, but were not acknowledged by WWE because of what the rules were that existed at the time. So that's my take on this. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you guys think Ted DiBiase has an argument here. Do you think Ted DiBiase should be recognized as an 8-day WWE World Champion? Do you kind of agree with me that it would set a terrible precedent? What do you guys think? I want to know, because this is an interesting topic, to say the least. It is getting traction. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if there's an argument that I missed about this. I'd like to know. I'm very interested in what people are thinking about this, because, again, it's amazing, that people are talking about a decision that's 30 plus years old, and people are talking about reversing a decision, or partially reversing a decision, because you can't fully reverse this decision. You can only reverse it partially, to just say that he was champion for 8 days, but then was stripped of it by Jack Tunney, rather than him not being acknowledged as champion for 8 days and then being stripped of the title, or the title being vacated. You can only partially reverse it, because the title was vacated going into WrestleMania 4 for that tournament where Randy Savage wins it. So let me know what you guys think. I'm really interested in to see what people's arguments are here. Comment, rate. Again, if you're not subscribed to the channel and you're a new subscriber, make sure to subscribe. A lot of people that watch my videos aren't actually subscribed, so please subscribe. Hit that notification bell for all the latest content. And like. And give this video a like. And that's about it, guys. I am the SS Ultimate Goku. Oh, and one more thing that can't be forgot about the argument here that I almost forgot, guys, on Ted DiBiase getting this decision reversed. Everybody's got a price for the $1 Million Man. Ha 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 ha. Okay, out of here. Peace.